My name is Julian Cole, and the night my life split in two started with a joke. I was 18 when my mother raised a glass of champagne in the middle of a crowded dining room and told her friends I was the family mistake. My father chuckled like she had just delivered the best punchline of the evening. Then he pointed at me from across the table and said, "She's our little statistical anomaly, the 1%." The room burst into laughter. Crystal glasses clinked. Someone actually wiped tears from their eyes because they thought it was that funny. I stood there holding a tray of appetizers my mother had shoved into my hands earlier, wearing a cheap navy dress I'd bought with my own paycheck from a grocery store job. While they joked about my existence, I hovered by the wall like part of the catering staff. What none of them knew was that 2 weeks earlier, I had logged into the account labeled Julian's College Fund. The balance that had been there my entire life was suddenly gone. Empty. And earlier that evening, I had overheard my parents whispering in the kitchen. "Don't worry about her," my father said casually. "Julian will figure something out. She always does." Later, when my mother rolled her eyes at a friend and added, "We tried with her, but not everyone is born to succeed," something inside me finally cracked. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I waited. I waited until the last guest's car disappeared down the quiet streets of Brookhaven Hills, until the porch lights dimmed and the house went silent. Then I slipped into my room. I packed a small backpack, 3 t-shirts, a pair of worn work boots, and the $50 I had hidden in an envelope under my mattress. At 1:17 a.m., I walked out of that house past the perfect lawns and decorative lanterns lining the sidewalks. I didn't look back. For the next 9 years, I stayed gone. I built a life for myself piece by piece, the slow and stubborn way you stack bricks into a wall. And then, one night, long after I thought that chapter of my life was sealed shut, someone started pounding on my apartment door. Hard. Through the wood, I heard voices I had sworn I would never hear again. "Julian, we need to talk, please. Open the door." Before I tell you what they wanted and how I responded, tell me what country you're in and what time it is, where the clock is. I want to see how far this story about a family mistake will spread. The next part of the story uses some fictional elements and AI tools for educational and emotional purposes. Thank you for listening, but if today isn't the right time, please take a break and take care of yourself. I'll be happy to hear from you again. 9 years can change a person more than most people realize. By the time those voices appeared outside my apartment door, I wasn't the frightened 18-year-old with a backpack anymore. I was 27, living in a modest but sturdy 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial edge of Phoenix, Arizona. The view from my kitchen window wasn't pretty: warehouses, train tracks, and the occasional semi-rumbling past, but it was mine. Instead of moving into a college dorm, I had stepped into adulthood the hard way. My life had been built through construction sites, tool belts, scraped knuckles, and alarms that rang at 5 a.m. I started at the very bottom. On my first crew, I was the kid nobody wanted. The girl the foreman looked at with quiet skepticism. The one who probably couldn't carry a ladder, according to one guy who thought I couldn't hear him. I carried the ladder anyway. While my parents back in Brookhaven Hills were probably still bragging about my brother Ethan Cole and his bright future, I was the one wiring hospitals, schools, and office buildings across the city. I watched entire structures come alive with electricity because I had calculated the load correctly and connected every line the right way. My mornings began before sunrise on dusty job sites. My evenings ended in night classes at a downtown trade institute where I studied electrical systems until my eyes blurred. I learned how to read blueprints. I learned how to calculate electrical loads and troubleshoot panels when something failed. But more importantly, I learned how to become the person people relied on when everything went dark. Eventually, the effort paid off. I earned my license. Then I climbed higher, literally. I joined a commercial crew that handled high-rise installations. Some days I worked suspended in a safety harness on the side of a 30-story building, sweat dripping down my back under the Arizona sun. Oddly enough, dangling above the city felt safer than sitting in my parents' living room ever had. By the time I turned 25, I had been promoted to lead electrician on smaller commercial projects. A year later, something even bigger happened. I met Marcus Hale. Marcus was a quiet, mechanical engineer with sharp instincts and the kind of calm confidence that made people listen when he spoke. He believed in numbers, systems, and results. More importantly, he believed in me. Together, we started a small company called Cole and Hale Electrical Systems. We focused on complex smart building installations, automated lighting, energy systems, integrated infrastructure. Work that required careful planning and steady hands, not just brute strength. For the first time in my life, the future looked like something I had built with my own two hands. And on paper, my life finally looked stable. But the truth was more complicated than that. Because even when you leave a toxic family behind, the echoes of their voices don't always disappear. Sometimes they follow you into the quiet moments. Sometimes they wait until the lights are off and the room is silent. And that was exactly the problem I hadn't solved yet. Success, I learned, doesn't always silence the past. Our company began to grow faster than either Marcus or I had expected. Within 2 years, we had hired several apprentices, young men and women, who reminded me painfully of myself at 18. Most of them were broke, underestimated, and carrying more responsibility than anyone their age should have had to handle. I saw the same look in their eyes that I used to see in the mirror. Hungry, determined, quietly angry at the world for expecting them to fail. So I tried to give them something I never received. Twice a month, I volunteered at a community center on the south side of Phoenix. It wasn't fancy old linoleum floors, flickering lights, folding chairs that scraped loudly against the floor, but it was a place where teenagers showed up because they were trying to avoid worse paths. I taught them the basics: how to replace an outlet safely, how to shut off power at the breaker box, how to repair small things around the house without burning it down. But the real lesson had nothing to do with wires. I told them something nobody had ever told me when I was their age. Learning a trade isn't a backup plan. It's power. Real power. The kind that lets you build your own life instead of begging someone else to hand you one. On paper, things looked good for me. Our company was winning bigger contracts. I had some money in savings for the first time in my life. My truck was old and dented, but it still ran because I knew exactly how to fix anything that broke under the hood. If you looked at my life from the outside, it probably seemed stable. But there is something people don't warn you about when you cut ties with a toxic family. Your body can leave long before your mind catches up. Some nights, even after a 12-hour shift, I would lie awake in my dark bedroom staring at the ceiling. And I would hear their voices again. Family mistake. 1%. It didn't matter how many buildings I wired. It didn't matter how many inspections I passed, or how many clients shook my hand after a successful project. Some stubborn corner of my mind still whispered the same question. What if they're right? What if I'm just pretending to belong in the life I've built? If you've ever cut contact with your family and still heard their voices in your head years later, you probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. For a long time, nothing changed. Then one afternoon, everything shifted because of a folder. It landed on my desk with a dull thud while Marcus was sorting through bid proposals. He slid it across the table toward me. New development outside the city, he said. Luxury townhomes, smart system installation. It's a big contract. I opened the packet and started flipping through the pages. High ceilings, home theaters, private offices, designer kitchens. The entire brochure looked like the kind of life my parents used to worship back in Brookhaven Hills. Then I reached the site plan, and the name printed across the top made my stomach tighten. Silverwood Ridge Estates. The words sat there on the page like a ghost from another life. Because that subdivision wasn't just another development project. It was built just a few streets away from the neighborhood where I had grown up. The place I had walked away from 9 years earlier with $50 and a backpack. And suddenly, for the first time in almost a decade, the past didn't feel very far away at all. Some memories don't fade. They wait quietly until something pulls them back to the surface. The moment I saw the site plan for Silverwood Ridge Estates, a strange chill ran across my skin. The main access road curved around the development and passed directly by a small cul-de-sac I recognized immediately. It was the street where I had grown up. For a full minute, I didn't move. My pen hovered above the paper while my eyes stayed locked on the map. I could picture the route perfectly. The sidewalk. The mailbox at the corner. The row of identical houses with trimmed hedges and glowing porch lights. I could almost see 18-year-old me walking down that same street in the middle of the night. My backpack digging into my shoulders. Sprinklers clicking across perfect lawns while the neighborhood slept. "Hey, you good," Marcus Hale leaned into the doorway of my office, snapping me back to the present. I forced a small smile and tapped the folder shut. "Yeah," I said casually. "Just a familiar area. We finished the proposal anyway. Not because I wanted anything to do with that place again, but because contracts like this were exactly what our company needed to move to the next level." 2 weeks later, the developer accepted our bid. When the email confirmation came through, I told myself it was simple business. Steel, conduit, scheduling, numbers, not memories. The first morning I drove out to the site, I almost turned the truck around at the freeway exit. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as the sign for Silverwood Ridge appeared ahead. For a moment, I considered taking the next ramp and disappearing back into the city. But I didn't. Instead, I kept driving. The development was still under construction when I arrived. Rows of half-framed townhouses stood like skeletons against the bright Arizona sky. The smell of fresh lumber and concrete filled the air. I parked near a temporary office trailer, signed in with the project manager, and started working. For most of the day, I focused on technical details: power routing, panel placement, load calculations. Work had always been my best defense against emotions. Later that afternoon, while reviewing property records for infrastructure planning, curiosity slowly crept in. Before I could stop myself, I typed in the address of the house where I grew up. My parents' house. The search results appeared instantly. And what I saw wasn't what I expected. The house was still technically in their names, but only barely. The file showed refinance after refinance, a second mortgage, a maxed-out home equity line of credit that was already past due. Page after page of liens stacked against the property like warning signs. My chest tightened. Not with sympathy, with recognition. These were the same people who once told me, "We're not paying for trade school. You're supposed to aim higher than that." The same people who had laughed when I walked out of their lives. And yet, somehow, they had managed to squeeze every dollar of equity out of their own home. Still, in 9 years, they had never reached out. No apology, no message asking if I was okay. Nothing. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then started digging deeper. And that was when I found something that made my fingers go completely still on the keyboard. Mot ban gi giao dich tai chin tu jung nam toi tron moi tam toi. Va no lien quan truk tiep gen qui jai hoc qua toi. Julian Cole College Fund. The amount listed was the exact balance I had seen disappear years ago when I first checked that account in confusion and panic. Every dollar was gone. And in the memo line typed in simple black text were 5 words that made my stomach tighten. Family emergency E. Ethan. My brother. So it hadn't been a bank mistake. It hadn't been market losses or hidden fees like my father had once casually suggested during a short dismissive conversation before I left home. They had taken my future and used it to rescue his. They hadn't just believed I was the family mistake. They had funded that belief. When I finished reviewing the records, I shut down the computer and drove back toward the city. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the unfinished rooftops of Silverwood Ridge as my truck rolled down the highway. Somewhere along that drive, a quiet realization settled into my mind. My parents hadn't simply insulted me that night years ago. They had built an entire financial decision around the assumption that I didn't matter. And now, judging by the pile of liens attached to their house, the math was finally catching up to them. I told myself it didn't matter. I had already moved on. They were just names buried inside a property tax report. Nothing more. But the truth was more complicated than that. Late at night, when my phone buzzed with a random notification or a message from work, my heart would sometimes jump before I even looked at the screen. For a split second, I would wonder if it was them. 9 years. 9 full years without a single call. No emails. No messages asking how I was doing. Not even a simple "we're proud of you." Then on a completely ordinary Wednesday afternoon, the silence ended. The first sign appeared in my company inbox. The subject line was nothing but my full name. Julian Cole. No greeting, no explanation. Just my name sitting there like a label on a package. The sender address looked generic, the kind you might ignore without a second thought. But when I opened the email, the words inside hit me like a sudden surge of electricity. Julian, this is your mother. We found your company online. We need to talk. It's urgent. Below the message was a phone number I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. I stared at the screen long enough for the blinking cursor to stop moving. 9 years earlier, I would have replied immediately, but the person I had become wasn't that girl anymore. Without typing a single word, I archived the email and went back to reviewing electrical diagrams. That evening, another message appeared. This time, it was a voicemail on my personal phone. Somehow, they had found that number too. I listened to it once. My father's voice came through the speaker, thinner than I remembered and rough around the edges. Julian. It's Dad. I know you're angry. We probably deserve that. But please call us back. We need your help. For a moment, I just sat there holding the phone. Then I deleted the message and returned to marking up blueprints for the next project. Denial can be a powerful thing. If you refuse to answer the door, you can almost convince yourself that whatever is waiting outside will eventually go away. For 2 days, that illusion held. Then on Friday evening, someone pressed my apartment doorbell so hard the wiring inside the wall actually vibrated. I was sitting on my couch with a container of leftover takeout balanced on my knee when the buzzer started ringing again and again. Before I could even stand up, the ringing turned into heavy knocking. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Because nobody I knew knocked like that. And then I heard a voice on the other side of the door. A voice I hadn't heard in 9 years. Julian, we know you're in there. My mother's voice cut through the door, strained and emotional in a way I didn't recognize. Another heavy knock followed, and then my father's voice joined hers. We need to talk. Please open the door. For a moment, I didn't move. Those were words I had replayed 1,000 times in my head over the years, but only as distant echoes in memory. Now they were happening in real time on the other side of my apartment door. I slowly set my plate down on the coffee table. My hands were shaking as I stood up and walked toward the door. The feeling was oddly familiar, like approaching an electrical panel you weren't completely sure had been shut off. Dangerous. Unpredictable. I could see their shadows under the threshold. 2 silhouettes where there used to be 4. Ethan wasn't there. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just a few inches. The 2 people standing in the hallway barely resembled the polished hosts from that party 9 years ago. Time had worked on them. My father, Daniel Cole, looked smaller somehow. His hair had turned more gray than brown, and his shoulders slumped forward like he was carrying a weight no one else could see. My mother, Linda Cole, wore the same careful makeup she always had, but it couldn't hide the deep lines around her mouth. Her eyes darted past me into the apartment as if she were trying to measure my life in a single glance. "Hi," I said. No hug, no smile, just the word. My mother's lips trembled slightly. "Julian, you look different." "That happens when people grow up," I replied. The hallway fell silent again. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "What do you want?" My father cleared his throat and glanced briefly at the small security camera mounted above my door before lowering his voice. "Can we come in? This isn't something we should talk about out here." Every survival instinct inside me screamed no. Every muscle in my body remembered exactly what it felt like to be 18 years old and powerless in front of these two people. But I wasn't 18 anymore. This was my apartment. My rules. My life. I stepped back just far enough to signal that they could enter, but only on my terms. 10 minutes, I said. And don't touch anything. They nodded quickly, almost like defendants entering a courtroom. For the first time in my life, I realized something important. I was the one holding the gavel now. They followed me inside and sat at the small kitchen table. The setting looked nothing like the elegant dining room they used to host parties in. There were no centerpieces or polished silverware. Just a chipped mug of water in front of each chair and a stack of folders I had grabbed from my work bag the moment I decided to let them in. For nearly a full minute, nobody spoke. My mother's eyes wandered slowly around the apartment. She studied the pair of work boots near the door, the framed electrician's license hanging on the wall, and the stack of electrical code books sitting on the counter. She was cataloging everything, measuring the life I had built without them. And judging by the look on her face, it was not the life she had imagined for the girl she once called a mistake. My mother finally broke the silence. "So, this is where you've been?" she said slowly, looking around my apartment the way someone inspects a hotel room they're not sure they like. "Working with wires." The old tone was still there. Softer maybe, but unmistakable. My father shot her a warning look before turning back to me. "Julian, we're not here to judge your choices," Daniel Cole said quickly. "We're here because we need your help." I leaned back in my chair. "You've had 9 years to need my help," I replied calmly. "You didn't call when I was sleeping in a borrowed truck. You didn't call when I was working 16-hour shifts and eating gas station sandwiches." I folded my arms. "So why now?" My father let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging. "Because things have gotten bad," he admitted quietly. "The house." "I've seen the liens," I interrupted. Both of them froze. I tapped the folder sitting on the table in front of me. Public records, multiple refinances, second mortgage, a maxed-out home equity line of credit. I looked directly at them. "You squeezed every dollar out of that place. That was your choice." My mother straightened in her chair, defensive. "We had to help your brother. Ethan's business was struggling." "You mean the business you emptied my college fund to save?" I slid a printed document across the table. The withdrawal record. The color drained from her face the moment she saw it. You were never supposed to see that," she whispered. "Exactly," I said quietly. "You called me the family mistake in front of a room full of people, and then quietly cashed out my future to protect the person you actually believed in." I folded my hands on the table. "So let's skip the part where we pretend this is a normal family visit. What do you want?" My father swallowed hard before answering. "The bank is calling the note," he said. "We're behind on everything. If we lose the house, we lose everything." He glanced at my mother before continuing. "Your mother's reputation at church, my standing with clients, our retirement, all of it." Then he said the part they had clearly rehearsed. "We just need someone with good credit and stable income to co-sign a restructuring loan. You have a successful business now." My mother leaned forward. "If you sign, we can save the house." For a moment, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so painfully predictable. "So let me make sure I understand this," I said slowly. "You want me, the family mistake, to legally tie myself to the debt you created while protecting the house you funded with the money you stole from my college account." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We know we hurt you," she said. We were under so much pressure back then. Ethan needed us. We didn't think you would actually leave. We thought you'd eventually get over it. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never thought. My voice stayed calm, but anger hummed beneath every word. You never respected me enough to imagine I might choose myself. Years of working around live electricity had taught me something important. You learned to keep your hands steady even when the current running through the wires could kill you. This conversation felt exactly like that. I built this life without you, I continued. Every license, every contract, every dollar. I held their eyes. You didn't just fail me, you sabotaged me and then laughed about it. My father leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. We're apologizing now. Doesn't that count for something? I shook my head. An apology is words. Consequences are actions. You came here because you're afraid of losing your house, not because you suddenly realized I deserved better. The room fell silent. Outside, a truck rumbled down the street. Somewhere above us, a neighbor slammed a door. Inside my kitchen, time felt heavy. Finally, I spoke again. Here's what I'm willing to do. Both of them straightened. I'll go with you to the bank meeting. I'll listen to what they say. I'll ask questions. I paused long enough for them to start looking hopeful. But I am not promising to sign anything. The hope faded. And before any decisions happen, I continued before we talk about houses or debt or anything else. You're going to sit there and listen. My mother frowned. Listen to what? To what it actually cost me. I said quietly, to walk out of your front door with $50 and a backpack. I leaned forward slightly. No interrupting. No defending yourselves. No. We did our best. Just listening. I gestured toward the door. If you can't handle that, you can leave right now and deal with the foreclosure on your own. My mother opened her mouth to argue. Then she stopped. For the first time in my entire life, Linda Cole looked uncertain. After a moment, she nodded slowly. Fine, she said quietly. Talk. And so I did. If you think I was right to refuse to co-sign their loan immediately and instead demand that they listen to what their choices actually cost me, leave a 1 in the comments. Sometimes the only way people finally understand the damage they caused is when you stop protecting them from the truth. The story didn't come out all at once. It spilled slowly, piece by piece, like something that had been trapped inside me for years, and finally found a way out. I told them about the nights I slept in a coworker's truck because I couldn't afford both rent and gas at the same time. I told them about the job site where an older electrician forgot to lock out a breaker and laughed when the shock made me jerk my hand back. I told them about studying electrical manuals by the light of a headlamp because the power in my rented room had been shut off 3 times in 1 year. For the first time in their lives, they heard what their little joke at that dinner party had actually set into motion. I watched their faces as the details sank in. My mother eventually wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. We were wrong, Linda Cole said hoarsely. We were cruel. I wish we could take it back. I believed she meant it. What I didn't believe was that wishing something was the same as changing. You might actually get the chance, I said quietly, but not in the way you think. When they finally left my apartment later that night, the silence inside the room felt heavier than before. I sat on the couch for a long moment staring at the blank wall, then grabbed my phone. There was only one person I trusted enough to bring into this mess. I sent a message. Maya, I need you. It's about my parents. 20 minutes later, Maya Rivera was sitting on my couch wearing leggings and an oversized hoodie, holding a pint of ice cream in one hand and a legal pad in the other. All right, she said, clicking a pen like a detective about to start an interrogation. Tell me everything. She pointed at the ice cream container. And yes, I brought snacks and paper. We are not handling this unprepared. So I walked her through the entire story, the email, the voicemail, My parents showing up at the door, the conversation at the kitchen table, the bank loan they wanted me to sign. Maya listened without interrupting, but I could see her eyebrows pulling tighter together with every new detail. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "So let me get this straight," she said. "They want you to attach your healthy credit score to their sinking financial ship." She shook her head. "Classic." "They're my parents," I muttered, and I hated how small my voice sounded when I said it. Part of me still felt the pull of that word. Family. Part of me thinks I should help, I admitted. Another part of me wants to watch the bank take the house and send them a sympathy card. Maya tilted her head and studied me carefully. "What do you actually want, Julian?" She tapped the pen against the legal pad. "Not what a good daughter is supposed to want. Not what society says you should do. What do you want?" The question hung in the air between us like a live wire. I thought about that 18-year-old girl standing in the corner of a dining room while people laughed at her. I thought about the teenagers at the community center writing down notes while I showed them how to replace a burned-out outlet. And I remembered something I had told those kids dozens of times. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. I want them to understand, I said finally. Not physically hurt. I don't want revenge like that. I looked down at my hands. I just want them to feel what it's like to lose someone. To understand that actions have consequences. That you can't gamble with your child's future and then expect them to bail you out later. Maya nodded slowly. "So what you want isn't revenge," she said. "You want accountability. And boundaries." And for once, I added quietly, "I want the math to add up." She tapped her pen against the notebook again. "Then emotions alone won't solve this," she said. "You need information. And you need another witness." I frowned. "What do you mean, your brother?" she said simply. "Have you talked to Ethan?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest. I hadn't spoken to Ethan Cole in years. The last thing I heard was that his business had collapsed, though my parents had never admitted that part out loud. I assumed they'd protect him until the end, I said. Maybe Maya replied calmly. "But if you're going to break a cycle like this, it helps to know exactly how deep it runs." That night, after she left, I dug through old contacts until I found a number buried deep in my phone. The contact name still read, "Ethan, don't answer." My thumb hovered above the call button for a long moment. Then I pressed it. He picked up on the second ring. "Hello." His voice sounded deeper than I remembered. Older. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I spoke. "It's Julian," I said quietly. "I heard Mom and Dad are in trouble." A long breath crackled through the phone line. "Yeah," Ethan said after a moment. "They are." Then he added something I never expected to hear from him. "And honestly, I think it's about time someone besides me told them no." The next evening, we agreed to meet. Not at home. Not somewhere comfortable. But at a cheap diner just off the highway, the kind of place with sticky menus, buzzing lights, and coffee that never stopped refilling. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fried bacon when Ethan Cole walked in. He looked older than the brother I remembered. His button-down shirt was wrinkled, his shoulders slightly hunched, and the tiredness in his eyes told me life hadn't been particularly kind to him either. He slid into the booth across from me without smiling. "They took your college fund," he said quietly. No greeting, no small talk. "I begged them not to," he continued. "But they did it anyway. They said you'd never actually use it. They figured you'd probably drop out or get married before finishing school." The words didn't shock me the way they should have. They just confirmed what I already suspected. Ethan looked down at the coffee mug between his hands. "When you left, they told everyone you ran away with some guy," he added. "They said they were heartbroken." My stomach twisted. "They told people I abandoned them." He nodded. "They played the victims everywhere. Church neighbors, Dad's clients. The story made them look sympathetic. It even helped them get money from a few people." Then he pulled his phone from his pocket and slid it across the table. Look. The screen showed screenshots of emails, financial records, and something else that made my chest tighten. A half-finished online credit card application. In my name. They tried to open credit using your information, Ethan said quietly. The system stopped it because the address didn't match. After that, they just complained about how ungrateful you were. Anger burned behind my eyes. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. Ethan watched my reaction carefully. I'm not here to defend them, he said after a moment. I enabled a lot of it. I believed the whole Golden Child story for years. He rubbed the back of his neck, but when my business collapsed and they started talking about refinancing the house again, I realized something. He leaned forward slightly. They don't care who sinks as long as the image survives. Then he said something that changed the direction of the entire situation. If you co-sign that loan, he said quietly, they'll drag you down with them. And they'll still talk about you like you're the problem. I stared into my coffee. So what do we do? It was the first time since they showed up at my door that I had said we. Ethan didn't hesitate. We stopped playing by their rules. By the time the waitress refilled our cups for the third time, we had a plan. It wasn't about humiliating them in front of their church or exposing them online. That kind of revenge never interested me. Our plan was quieter, sharper. We would go to the bank meeting together. We would listen. And then, in front of someone who cared only about facts and signatures, we would tell the truth. The college fund, the credit attempts, the lies they told to protect their reputation. And when the moment came, we would both refuse to sign anything. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. For once, the equation would be honest. The meeting with the bank took place in a dull conference room lit by harsh fluorescent lights. The window looked out over a nearly empty parking lot. My parents sat on one side of the long table, clutching a neat stack of papers between them. Ethan and I sat on the other side. Between us lay a legal pad, a glass of water, and 9 years of silence. The loan officer, a woman in her 40s named Caroline Grant, clicked her pen and began the meeting. Mr. and Mrs. Cole, she said professionally, we've reviewed your application. As discussed on the phone, your current debt-to-income ratio is challenging. She glanced at me. Adding your daughter as a co-signer could improve your chances, but I'll need her consent. My father straightened in his chair and gave me the same polished smile he used to give his business clients. We understand, Daniel Cole said smoothly. Julian knows that family helps each other. I met his gaze calmly. Actually, I said, that's what we're here to talk about. For the next 10 minutes, Caroline Grant walked us through the numbers. Missed payments, growing interest, the timeline for foreclosure if the loan wasn't approved. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, glancing at the officer often enough to make sure the tears were noticed. Finally, the officer turned to me. So, Ms. Cole, she asked, are you prepared to take legal responsibility if your parents default? The room became so quiet I could hear the hum of the exit sign above the door. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened a folder and slid a stack of documents across the table. Before I answer that, I said calmly, I think there's some context missing. On top was the withdrawal record from my college fund. Underneath were the property refinance records. Behind them sat the screenshot of the attempted credit card application in my name. When I was 18, I said steadily, my parents emptied my college account without telling me. They used the money to cover my brother's failing business. I paused. When I left home after being publicly humiliated, they told people I ran away and portrayed themselves as victims. Caroline Grant looked up from the papers, clearly surprised. They later attempted to open credit accounts under my name without my consent, I continued. And they have not contacted me once in 9 years until they needed someone with good credit to save this house. The officer looked toward my parents. Is this accurate? My mother sputtered. Those were family decisions, she said quickly. She's twisting things to make us look bad. Before she could continue, Ethan spoke. I was there, he said calmly. All eyes turned toward him. They did take her college fund, he said. They did attempt to open credit in her name. They did tell people she abandoned them. He leaned back slightly. And I won't be signing anything either. My father's face flushed red. You too, he snapped. After everything we've done for you, Ethan's jaw tightened. That's the problem, Dad, he said quietly. Everything you did was about appearances, not about us. The loan officer cleared her throat. I can't comment on family relationships, she said carefully. But from a financial standpoint, co-signing would put Ms. Cole's assets and credit at serious risk. She looked at me. In my professional opinion, extreme caution would be advisable. My mother turned toward me with streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. Julian, please, she whispered. If we lose the house, I'll be humiliated. People will talk. We'll have to move into some tiny apartment. There it was. Not, we're sorry. Not, we want to make things right. Just humiliation. I thought about that 18-year-old girl standing in the corner of a party while people laughed at her. I thought about sleeping in trucks and working double shifts. You're not too old to start over, I said quietly. You're just used to never hearing the word no. My father slammed his hand on the table. You're really going to let your parents end up on the street? No, I replied calmly. I'm going to let you end up wherever your choices take you. I turned back to the loan officer. I will not be co-signing. Caroline Grant nodded. Understood. She looked at my parents. Without a co-signer, the restructuring loan will have to be denied. However, I can connect you with a financial counselor who can help you plan your next steps. My mother stared at me like the universe had betrayed her. You can't do this, she whispered. We're your parents. For the first time in my life, those words didn't bring guilt. They brought clarity. Being my parents was supposed to mean protecting me, I said quietly. Not selling my future to save your image. I gathered my papers. I'm not doing this to punish you, I added. I'm doing it because I spent 9 years fixing the damage you caused in my life, and I won't let you create another mess under my name. Ethan stood up beside me. I'll help you move, he told them calmly. But I won't be your shield anymore. We walked out together, leaving them sitting in a room full of consequences. Consequences rarely arrive all at once. They unfold slowly the way truth eventually does. A few months after the bank denied the loan, my parents lost the house in Brookhaven Hills. It was sold at auction to a quiet couple who replaced the oversized security lights with flower pots on the porch. Daniel and Linda Cole ended up moving into a small apartment across town. From what Ethan told me later, the transition was not easy. They had to face people at church who whispered behind their backs. Friends who used to admire them suddenly kept their distance. Reality has a way of stripping away carefully polished reputations. My father had a minor health scare not long after the move. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to scare him into finally seeing a therapist. My mother joined him eventually. According to Ethan, the first few sessions were spent blaming everyone else. The bank, the economy, me. But eventually, something shifted. Eventually, the blame ran out. I didn't attend any of those sessions. That was their work to do. Mine was somewhere else. I kept building my company with Marcus Hale. We expanded our apprenticeship program and brought in more young workers who reminded me of the person I used to be. Determined, overlooked, hungry to prove someone wrong. Then we did something else. With profits from the Silverwood Ridge Development Project, we helped fund a scholarship program through the Trade Institute where I had studied years earlier. One of those scholarships has a name that still makes me smile. We call it the 1% Fund. But not because someone is a failure. It's for the 1% of people brave enough to break the patterns they were born into. Every application asks the same question. Tell us about a moment when someone underestimated you and what you chose to do next. Sometimes I imagine the 18-year-old version of myself reading that question, and I wish someone had told her what I know now. Being born into a family does not mean you owe them your sanity, or your savings, or unlimited second chances. Love without respect is just control wearing a nicer disguise. You are allowed to set boundaries even if people call you selfish. You are allowed to say no even when their voices shake. You are allowed to build a life where your value is not measured by how much pain you are willing to endure. What I learned from this story is simple, but not easy to practice. Protecting yourself is not selfish. Sometimes we are taught that helping our family at any cost is the right thing to do. But if that help destroys the life you worked so hard to build, then it is no longer love, it becomes a burden. It took me many years to understand that everyone has to take responsibility for their own choices. If you were in my situation, what would you do? Would you sign the papers to save their house? Or would you choose to protect the future you fought to build? There isn't an easy answer, and that's why I'd really like to hear your honest thoughts. If you stayed and listened all the way to the end of this story, thank you. It truly means a lot. Taking the time to listen and reflect already makes a difference. And you might not realize it, but when you leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, or share this story, you help it reach someone else who may be going through something similar. Sometimes a small action from you can give another person the courage they need to stand up for themselves and choose a better path.